Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We're going to get started with tonight's program. My name is Mia, and I am a part of the research team here at the People's Forum. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We are so excited to welcome Belly of the Beast here. We have Liz, Olivia, and Lindsay here, and they're going to talk about their work after we screen a few of their episodes and short clips. And I will invite Lee up soon to give an intro to Belly of the Beast. But welcome to the People's Forum. If you haven't been here before, the People's Forum is a popular and political education space. And we are so excited to celebrate culture and filmmaking and storytelling in the context of sharing the truth about the Cuban reality. We know that the blockade prevents more than just material resources going to Cuba, which is extremely devastating, extremely restricting, but it also prevents us from exchanging ideas and in collaborating with the Cuban people. So Belly of the Beast has been able to provide some of that context to American audiences, and it's a really amazing work. So I'm going to invite up Lee from Belly of the Beast to introduce a little bit.
All right. Good night, everybody. Can you hear me okay? All right. Thank you to Mia. Thank you to everybody at the People's Forum for having us. My name is Lee Schlenker. I'm a producer and correspondent based in Washington, D.C., formerly based in Havana, Cuba, with Belly of the Beast, which is a 3-year-old independent award-winning media project made up of U.S. and Cuban journalists that are trying to fill the media void that we all know exists in not just the mainstream media, but even in alternative and progressive media spaces here in the United States. We seek to really shed light on what is happening in Cuba on the ground, the reality that is underreported, misreported, decontextualized in the US press about the Cuban people, their struggle, and really foregrounding the impact of US sanctions and the US policy of aggression and the economic war that the US government has been waging against the Cuban people for over 60 years now. So I'm really excited to be helping to organize this tour in which our award-winning presenter, Liz Oliva Fernández, is here in the United States for the first time. Let's give her a huge round of applause to Liz. Liz will be here for at least a month, all throughout the East Coast, and stay tuned later in the year for a nationwide film tour. We're going to be screening here in New York, in Boston, in DC, Philly, and Baltimore, as well as filming an upcoming documentary in which Liz exposes and reports on what is driving U.S. policy under the Biden administration towards Cuba, the economic and political interests, and really showing not just how we have shown in the past the impacts of U.S. policy, but what is behind this policy, and providing sort of the investigative information that people in the United States need to know in order to, more successfully inform themselves, educate themselves, and understand what is behind U.S. policy towards Cuba and how to better fight against it. So I'm going to cede the floor to a few different films that Liz has been the lead presenter and journalist for. Episode 1 and Episode 5 of The War on Cuba. Has anybody seen it? Raise your hand if you've seen The War on Cuba. Okay, that's great that some have seen it and some have not. It's really, really different, I think, from most other reporting and filmmaking that has been done recently on Cuba. And so we'll be showing those two segments, as well as some shorter films that Liz produced at the end of last year, some of which you all may have seen. So I'll give it over to Mia to screen, and then we'll have Liz and Reed answer some questions and talk a little bit more about the project and what we're all about. Thank you so much.
I'm Liz. People come to Havana looking for the real Cuba. and this is what they do. But this is not my Cuba. My Cuba isn't so romantic, but I'm happy here. I love my country. Cuba is safe. We've got free healthcare and education. I graduated from university without paying a penny, and I became a journalist.
Pero lo mejor que tiene Cuba es su gente.
But we've got one huge problem, the economy.
La situación está mala.
Malísima.
Fea.
Pésimamente mal.
Está difícil.
Estresante.
Caótica.
En candela.
Ahora mismo está fatal.
A mí ni me preguntan.
During the pandemic, people have to wait in line for hours just to buy food.
Aquí la cosa está dura. COVID. I'm used to this. I grew up in crisis.
Y no es embargo ni bloqueo, es guerra.
The legislation I signed today further tightens that embargo.
By maintaining our embargo,
El bloqueo económico persiste.
Cruel e insensato bloqueo que haya existido contra nación.
Our government blames pretty much everything on the U.S. embargo. They call it the blockade.
Es que lo queman mucho.
We get bored of hearing about the blockade all the time. But it's real. The United States has been waging war against Cuba for 60 years. It's not a war with bullets or bombs, but it touches every aspect of our lives. Recently, more than ever.
¿Cómo está Ernesto? Buenos días. ¿Está listo para trabajar en el campo hoy?
¿Cómo no? Voy a trabajar ahora.
Hay personas que me conocen de 25 años y no saben que me faltan las piernas.
¿Me puede mostrar sus prótesis?
Sí, cómo no. Estas son de aluminio y fibra de plástico. No tienen ni articulación, son rígidas. Y se puede partir por aquí. Y entonces la parte del pie se puede partir también. Una vez por aquí cargando un saco de yuca, se me partió por aquí. Porque a mi hija ya te digo que cuando esto se rompe es un problema.
This is where Ernesto goes to get his prosthetics, free of charge. But Ernesto can't get the specialized prosthetics he needs because it's illegal for Cuba to buy them.
¿Y existen unas prótesis un poco más resistentes que usted le pudieran servir más?
Existen unas prótesis más resistentes, con más calidad. Caminaría mejor, incluso podía trabajar mucho más, pero no tenemos acceso a ella por el bloqueo.
Ernesto doesn't complain. In Cuba, we've lived with scarcity for so many years, we take it for granted. The blockade is the longest trade embargo in modern history. It isn't motivated by concerns about human rights. It's about money and power. Until 1959, Cuba was like a U.S. colony. Our economy was controlled by U.S. companies, corrupt politicians, and the mafia. After the revolution, Cuba nationalized the U.S. companies. We claim our sovereignty, our right to govern ourselves. The government gave basic rights to the majority: women, black people, campesinos, the working class. The blockade was retaliation. It's basically a form of economic warfare. The blockade stops Cuba from doing business with the United States. They can't buy our stuff and we can't buy theirs. And we can pay for things because banks won't lend us money or even let us open accounts. The blockade also stops Cuba from doing business with other countries. That's not all. The blockade also locks us out of a big part of the internet. We're used to getting bad news from the United States.
But 5 years ago, llegaron por primera vez buenas noticias de la Casa Blanca.
Does not serve America's interests or the Cuban people to try to push Cuba towards collapse.
¡Que molan!
Obama announced new relations with Cuba. He began by loosening the blockade. U.S. airlines and cruise ships started taking tourists to Havana. Business was booming. Clandestina became Cuba's first independent design store in 2015. Idania is Clandestina's co-founder. She started the store after Cuba opened its economy to private business.
Clandestina pretende establecer el trabajo de los jóvenes diseñadores cubanos.
After Idania met Obama, Clandestina became a symbol of Cuba's new private sector.
Havana was like overcrowded, celebrities, musicians, politicians, everybody. It was insane. Chanel runway, Fast and the Furious shooting, Rolling Stone concert. The mood was anything is possible, all this sense of change, and finally to be aware of I have a future here. I can stay here. I don't have to leave my country. But then Trump won the election, so.
But all of the concessions that Barack Obama has granted the Castro regime were done through executive order, which means the next president can reverse them. And that I will do.
The Trump administration is imposing new restrictions on U.S. travel to Cuba.
John Bolton making a South Florida stop today to talk to the Cuban American community.
Unveiling sweeping changes to Cuba policy.
A major blow to the new U.S. Cuba relationship.
The U.S. has banned flights.
All families to leave Cuba.
The U.S. government will also ban trips by cruise ships.
They'll have to go after their finances.
Limiting the amount of money, fresh U.S. sanctions.
It's part of a trend.
U.S. tourism stopped. And if you don't have tourism, you don't have business. No tourism, zero remittances, no trade at all. You are suffocating the private sector. You are suffocating the Cuban people.
Since COVID, things have gone from bad to worse.
¿Tiene ibuprofeno por casualidad?
No, mamita, eso está en baja.
¿Y warfarina?
Tampoco.
¿Y metformina?
Tampoco.
¿Y enalapril?
Eso está en baja.
You'd think the US might loosen the embargo during a pandemic. Nope. Recently, 2 Swiss companies refused to sell Cuba ventilators because they were owned by a larger US company. And a US-owned airline wouldn't take a donation of masks and ventilators to Cuba. On top of all that, the Trump administration made it even harder for our family members in the U.S. to send us money.
The Trump administration has killed a deal that would allow Cuban baseball players to play for Major League Baseball.
El bloqueo afecta hasta nuestro deporte nacional.
Cian Vega is one of Cuba's top young baseball prospects.
Desde chiquito siempre mi papá me inculcó entrenar, me llevaba todos los días a la pelota. Empecé a ver mi talento a partir de los 13, 14 años. Hay ya bastantes peloteros cubanos en la MLB que se han formado aquí en Cuba. Representar a mi país en el más alto nivel, que es la MLB, sería mi sueño, la verdad. Trump, cuando nos cerró las puertas de firmar con la MLB, casi todos los peloteros se sintieron mal por esa noticia.
Claro, porque ahora, en caso de que tú quisieras jugar con la MLB, tendrías que renunciar.
Tendría que renunciar a mi país, no me gustaría, la verdad. Me gustaría jugar y volver a mi país, vivir con mi familia, no estar lejos de ella.
For his rivals, tonight just might be the last big chance to stop Donald Trump.
It's hard to believe now, but 5 years ago, some Cubans thought a Trump presidency wouldn't be that bad.
Si me tuviera que escoger, yo escogería a Donald Trump.
Y sabe que Cuba tiene un mercado virgen.
Y él le interesaría mucho invertir en Cuba. Entonces no creo que todo ese proceso que ha ocurrido lo eche para atrás.
That same month, Trump's executives were visiting Cuba and playing golf here. It wasn't the first time Trump tried to do business in Cuba. This is the website for La Oficina Cubana de Propiedad Industrial. It's where foreign companies apply to do business in Cuba. In 2008, Trump registered his brand name for hotels, casinos, beauty contests, television programs, and golf courses.
I'm okay with the Cuba situation, but I want to tell you they should be making a good deal.
So, what or who made Trump change his position on Cuba?
Guys, we have a con artist as the front runner in the Republican Party.
Thank God he has really large ears, the biggest ears I've ever seen.
And you know what they say about men with small hands?
Rubio, total lightweight.
If he hadn't inherited $200 million, you know where Donald Trump would be right now?
No,
selling watches in Manhattan.
Trump's fight with Rubio didn't last long.
A man that's really become a friend of mine, Senator Marco Rubio. Great guy.
After Trump won, they became allies. Trump let Rubio pick his Latin American team, and Rubio wrote Trump's new Cuba policy.
I have wonderful memories from our visit during the campaign. I was right before the election. I guess it worked, right?
Trump's war in Cuba has won him the support of powerful Cuban American businessmen and politicians like Marco Rubio. They helped him win Florida, the country's biggest swing state, in 2016. And Trump believes this is the way to win again in 2020.
I'm Cuban and support Trump.
I am so thrilled to be back here with all of my friends in Little Havana.
When U.S. presidents say they are talking to the Cuban people, they're not talking to us. Because we don't get to vote in Florida.
Pero los cubanos no cogemos lucha con la política de los Estados Unidos. El bloqueo está ahí y punto. Así que para adelante, que no hay más nada. Hi, I'm Liz, and this is the Malecón.
It's where people go on dates and hang out. It's also a place where we say goodbye. I've met up with many friends here over the years before they left Cuba. Some went to the United States.
A veces no lo parece, pero Yuma está ahí mismo, 90 miles away.
The U.S. is seen by many as a land of hope and opportunity. But the United States is also the cause of many of our problems. It's a contradiction that's easy to forget about here in our day-to-day struggle to get by. And because there doesn't seem to be any way things can get better. Earlier this year, frustrations boiled over into anti-government protests. They only lasted a matter of hours, but they were a big deal because nothing like it had happened for more than 60 years. Since then, people in Cuba and around the world are talking more than ever about our future. I want to be part of that conversation, pero antes debemos entender cómo llegamos a las protestas.
To do that, we need to look both inside Cuba y hacia el norte.
The July 11 protests didn't start in Havana. They began here in downtown San Antonio de los Baños, a small city not far from Cuba's capital. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel came here a few hours later.
Nosotros vinimos aquí para, junto a los revolucionarios de este pueblo, demostrar que aquí la calle es de los revolucionarios.
But the anti-government protests had already broken out in cities across the country. San Antonio has been calm since July 11. So why did people take the streets here?
El 11 de julio, ¿cuál es el motivo de las protestas?
Habían varios motivos. El tema de la corriente fue uno.
Quizás en algún punto era el pico de la pandemia también. Se juntaron varias situaciones.
Hola.
Los apagones eran 4 horas, 5 horas. Por eso fue la revuelta que hubo aquí en Santo Domingo. La situación aquí en Cuba ha sido mala. La medicina entra pocas veces a la farmacia. La dipirona no ha entrado. Hace como 3 meses que no entra.
El apagón fue el top. Ya el pueblo estaba tan a tope entre COVID y medicinas que no tenía. El pueblo, mientras no le afecte mucho el tema medicina y más o menos tenga su plato de comida, no va a protestar.
20 pesos, un pequeño plátano burro, ¿qué más quiere que te diga?
¿Qué es lo más difícil?
Las medicinas y el alimento, las dos cosas más importantes.
¿Por qué usted cree que la gente se lanza a la cuenta?
Las tiendas en divisa. Yo por lo menos no puedo acceder ahí. Yo no gano mal en mi trabajo porque trabajo en el campo, pero no puedo comprar nada. El bloqueo es que nos tiene a nosotros contra la pared.
The Cuban government blames the economic crisis on U.S. sanctions, and many Cubans agree.
Hola, buenos días.
Lo que va a afectar al pueblo completo, lo que Trump hizo a Cuba, 100 y pico de medidas para jodernos a nosotros. Y ahora es Biden, tan sinvergüenza como el otro.
But others, especially young people, blame the Cuban government.
Va a la tienda moneda nacional y nada. Es donde nosotros podemos comprar. Porque hay tantas tiendas en verde. Y si aquí nadie le paga en verde.
El 11 de julio estaba borrando la esquina ahí.
¿Qué pensaste en ese momento?
Que la gente se cansaron de los apagones, de la comida, que sales a buscar algo por la calle y no lo encuentras.
¿Quién cree la gente que es responsable?
Los dirigentes.
No todo el mundo va a hablar, no todo el mundo va a decir.
Lo sé.
Todavía hay gente preso del 11 de julio que no han salido. Entonces, imagínate.
¿Qué es lo que dirías que es más difícil aquí?
La comida y la medicina.
¿Quién es el responsable de todas las escaseces?
Los arriba, ¿no? Deben ser lejos, ¿no? El gobierno.
¿Cómo te mantienes informado?
Oh, Facebook se ve todo el mundo sube todo. Mira, se fue la luz ahora mismo, mira. Viste, ya por ahí están gritando, se fue la luz. Se fue la luz.
¿Qué pasa? Olvídate eso, con nosotros no hay quien pueda.
Te veo, Katina.
In Cuba, people have different opinions about who is to blame for our economic crisis. In Washington, one view predominates.
There is only one blockade in Cuba, and it is the blockade that this regime has imposed on its people.
The regime still sanctions, or I should say, keeps people on long lines to get basic foods as a way of controlling the people.
Cuba is unfortunately, a failed state.
Si el fracaso económico es solo debido al gobierno cubano, ¿qué sentido tiene el bloqueo?
In April 1960, a State Department memo proposed that the United States should deny money and supplies to Cuba to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of government. In 1962, John F. Kennedy followed that advice, imposing a full trade embargo on Cuba. 60 years later, the embargo is still in place, and it's even more far-reaching. In Cuba, we call it the blockade. The blockade isn't just between Cuba and the United States, it's global. In 1992, the Torricelli Act blocked any ship that docks in Cuba from entering a U.S. port for 6 months, and it banned foreign subsidiaries of U.S. companies from trading with Cuba. Democratic Senator Robert Torricelli said the act was meant to wreak havoc on the island. 4 years later, Bill Clinton signed a law designed to stop foreign investment in Cuba called the Helms-Burton Act. Under Barack Obama, the U.S. government began fining European banks billions of dollars for processing transactions involving Cuba and other countries. Donald Trump imposed an avalanche of sanctions, further isolating Cuba from the U.S. and the rest of the world. If this wasn't enough, just before leaving office, Trump put Cuba on the state sponsors of terrorism list.
They're not Trump's regulations anymore, they're Joe Biden's.
Cuba is suffering stronger sanctions now than I think any other country, although it is, of course, no threat at all to the US.
Why don't companies and banks outside the US want to do business with Cuba?
The sanctions on Cuba, they act extraterritorially. the European banks that won't touch a transaction, even if legal. I've counseled these banks that they're afraid of being fined and punished by the United States. How interested would you be in a 100 euro fee for transmitting funds involving Cuba if somehow it violates U.S. sanctions and they come after you for millions and millions of dollars? The U.S. Treasury has reaped from European banks close to $12–15 billion. The risk is too great, the reward's too small.
What's been the impact of the U.S. government putting Cuba on the state sponsors of terrorism list?
The banks and the companies that they were dealing with before would back off because they were advised by their compliance departments not to deal with Cuba. The compliance departments have been growing in the last few years because of anti-money laundering provisions, which have been getting stronger. And it was clearly a political decision to put Cuba on that list. And the effects have been devastating. COVID, combined with US sanctions, has been to create a crisis in the Cuban economy. Suddenly, you've got half as much foreign exchange coming into the country. Now, if you look at what the foreign exchange is used by, 50% is spent on food and fuel. The trouble is with Cuba is access to international finance was curtailed, severely curtailed during the same period. So the cushion that every other country in the world has in terms of borrowing money during crisis was not available to Cuba. It was completely unavoidable that there would be insecurity on food, that there would be power cuts, and that the medical services would be stretched. There was absolutely no miracle that could have been achieved that would have prevented those things from happening.
When Cuba was put back on the list, all banks stopped handling any transactions involving Cuba. Cuba is not a supporter of international terrorism. Nobody seriously would argue they are. Cuba's on the terrorist list now, not because of Donald Trump. It's on the terrorist list because Joe Biden hasn't taken them off the list.
Cuba doesn't publish its own list of terrorists supporting governments. If it did, the US government would be on it. In 1976, a bomb attack against a Cuban civilian airliner killed 73 people. It was the deadliest terrorist attack in the Western Hemisphere until 9/11. The suspected masterminds were former CIA operatives Luis Posada Carriles and Orlando Bosch Avila. Both later lived freely in Miami and were never prosecuted for the crime by US authorities. An Italian tourist was killed by a bomb in a hotel in Havana in 1997. And recently, Cuban state media reported an escalation of violent attacks financed by Cuban Americans since Trump assumed office. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo claimed the Cuban government supports murderers, bomb makers, and hijackers. But Pompeo may not be the most credible source.
I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
Healthcare in Cuba is free, and every community has a health clinic with a doctor and a nurse.
Muchas gracias, doctor.
Roxana is the doctor to more than 400 families in Center Havana's Cayo Hueso neighborhood.
Un médico de familia es un médico que está directamente vinculado a la comunidad, que forme parte de la familia de cada uno de los pacientes que nosotros tenemos.
¿Cómo ha sido tu trabajo en los últimos años?
Desde que comenzó la COVID hasta la fecha, ha sido mucho más intenso.
Of Roxana's 1,000 patients, 39 have gotten COVID. None have died. Her biggest challenge these days isn't COVID, but shortages of medications for other health conditions.
Pero voy a darle loratadina, que es lo que sacan, porque benadrilina no sacan. ¿Desde cuándo no tienes tratamiento para la presión?
Hace 15 días.
Hay que reajustarle el tratamiento porque Cartoprin hace 2 meses que no entra. Dipirona no hay Mercedes. En estos momentos de escasez de todos los medicamentos, es difícil manejarlo porque supuestamente nosotros debemos dar una solución. Por mucho que queramos, a veces no podemos
¿Cómo es posible que Cuba tenga una industria biofarmacéutica capaz de producir vacunas para enfrentar la COVID-19 y al mismo tiempo tenga este déficit tan grande de medicamentos?
Fidel tuvo la previsión aquella que desarrolló la biotecnología, pero la materia prima viene de otros países. Países que si Estados Unidos, por el embargo, les prohíbe darnos la materia prima, ya no se pueden hacer aquí.
During the last year, the Cuban health system has had to practice triage. Many of its resources have gone to fighting COVID at the expense of producing basic medications.
Surte la farmacia los medicamentos cada 15 días. A veces no pasa.
Esta sería la parte de las cremas, que cremas sí no tenemos ninguna. ¿Qué es lo que más se resiente que falta? Aquí los antibióticos, los antiinflamatorios, la duralgina, los antihistamínicos. Es difícil. Estamos detrás del mostrador, ver una madre que llega desesperada con un bebé, uno trata de darle la solución, pero nosotros tenemos familia y a veces nos vemos en ese problema. Every afternoon, Roxana makes house calls.
Gracias. Esa no puedes tener el pie así, tienes que ponerlo en alto, este circulatorio. Martín recién debutó con una diabetes, ya tiene su tratamiento, se está controlando. Yamila, buenos días. ¿Cómo te estás? Más o menos, yo te veo lo más bien. Te estoy viendo hasta en Facebook y todo. Te descubrí, ¿viste? ¿Viste que yo estoy en todas?
¿Ha tenido usted muchos déficits con los medicamentos últimamente?
Ella le mandaron un medicamento. Sí. Para probarte los sodio, empecé a mandar. Pero desapareció el medicamento.
¿Y duragina tienes aunque sea, Yamila?
No. Cuando ella está con dolor de cabeza, simplemente le pongo pañitos fríos en la cabeza.
Roxana has seen tough times. She became a doctor during Cuba's special period, the economic depression after the fall of the Soviet Union.
Yo me gradué en el año 93. Hasta la fecha, primera vez en todos esos años que yo he visto una situación como esta en estos momentos.
We have to vote for a new Cuba policy as well. This administration approach isn't working.
Here in Cuba, we expected a change in U.S. policy when Biden was elected, and we weren't the only ones.
Our expectations were that he would quickly do away with many of the policies that seemed extremely politically driven.
Instead of implementing a new Cuba policy, the Biden administration did a policy review first. Was that necessary?
From the outside, it looks like what it was mostly a delaying tactic that would serve what they construed as being their political interests in Florida. Often, a crisis gives you a chance to change policy. And Cuba has been experiencing a deep economic crisis driven primarily by COVID, the loss of tourism, and the Trump measures. It would have been so easy on humanitarian grounds to argue, this is a crisis, let's help the Cuban people. And this administration completely missed the opportunity. So there were some things that would have been very easy: to restore remittances, one memorandum; to reverse the Trump policy of putting Cuba on the terrorist list, one memorandum; to reopen the embassy, but they didn't do it. And they've escalated what they call democracy promotion programs, which are really regime change programs to put pressure on the government. What we see here is a distancing from Barack Obama, even though Joe Biden was vice president at the time. It's almost as if they were trying to be more Trump than Trump on the Cuba issue.
So why is Biden trying to be more Trump than Trump?
They thought that buying time was going to get them political credibility in the Miami community, which I think it's foolish. It's doomed to fail. But if you go and you're trying to chase after the old right-wing leadership of the Miami community, and which the Republicans already own, you're not going to get anywhere. The Biden administration, they are now stuck in a trap. The 11 July protests in Cuba, which have been spun almost universally here in the United States as evidence of increasing prospects of regime collapse in Havana, have further strengthened those who've argued that now is not the time to do a new policy.
This year, the economic situation got so bad, you could feel the anger and tension in the street.
Cuba was a tinderbox. It would only take a spark to start a fire.
Throughout 2020, Cuba had one of the world's lowest COVID rates. Mass graves were built across the Americas, but Cuba had only 146 deaths by the end of the year. Cases were so low in Cuba, we sent thousands of doctors to dozens of countries. But in early 2021, our COVID rate started increasing. Then, in June, as the Delta variant hit Cuba, cases suddenly skyrocketed. The first epicenter of this outbreak was Matanzas province, east of Havana. Hospitals were overflowing, and the death rate soared. As the pandemic overtook Matanzas, the hashtags SOS Matanzas and SOS Cuba went viral on Twitter. The tweets were about Cuba, but they caught fire outside the island. Not all the concern was genuine. Fake accounts and bots were pumping out thousands of tweets a day. Suddenly, celebrities jumped on the bandwagon. Some blamed the Cuban government. Most just tweeted SOS Cuba. But what did SOS Cuba mean? In Miami, it meant more than just helping people on the island.
Necesitamos una intervención humanitaria ya para el pueblo de Cuba.
Una intervención humanitaria.
Humanitarian interventions are basically military interventions, supposedly to stop human rights abuses, but often used to justify war. All this had nothing to do with Cuba's COVID crisis. It's a double standard. There were no SOS hashtags for Brazil, India, Italy, and nobody called for a humanitarian intervention of the United States, even though it has had 3 times more COVID deaths per capita than Cuba. After SOS Cuba blew up around the world, it caught fire inside Cuba, at first online, and then on the streets.
In Cuba, we have a joke. Nuestro deporte nacional no es la pelota, sino la lucha.
We've lived under the U.S. blockade for as long as I've been alive, and a lot longer than that. We have struggled and have found ways to survive, but this past year, they pushed us to the brink.
Para luego pretender que nos estaban ayudando.
May Day in Cuba attracts visitors from around the world, including many working-class people from the United States.
I have experienced May Day in the United States, and it's nothing like this. I feel like here, it's so different. There's people here that look like me, and actually being here with the working people and knowing that they have those type of rights that we wish that we had, just makes me so happy.
Well, we don't actually celebrate May Day. We celebrate Labor Day on a different date, and generally it's not a celebration of workers' rights or achievements. So that's something that's very suppressed. And our labor history in the United States is incredibly violent.
I spend my May Day here in Cuba because this is a country that actually supports the vision that we all aspire to see.
The people of the United States, we are different from our government, and we stand in firm solidarity with Cuba.
Just growing up, seeing stuff on TV, I've always questioned the truth behind it, and so I wanted to see for myself. It's definitely an eye-opener.
Because at home, we don't get real news. We don't get real information about what's going on here.
I think it's really important for me to meet directly with Cubans and bring the truths that I learned back to the United States.
Cuba is suffering under reinforcement of the blockade. Even though that is happening, Cubans still wake up every day and still contribute to society. They still work, not only for themselves, but the world.
Cuba stands as a beacon to those of us who struggle against oppression.
When our own country, our own government is oppressing economically, militarily, and other ways, it's our duty, moral responsibility to have solidarity with those people.
código de la familia que viene a remover todo lo que son las bases del patriarcado, del costumbrismo, del machismo.
Me siento muy orgullosa, a pesar de los trabajos que pasa uno diariamente combatiendo con los estereotipos, con la sociedad, construir una familia totalmente diferente a cualquier familia tradicional.
Siempre quise tener hijos. Conocimos a Oliva y a Lindsay. Se empezó a dar esa cosquillita, ese interés en comenzar a crear algo.
Estamos armando nuestra propia historia de familia. Es inspiración de todo lo que uno quiere hacer y puede hacer.
No somos 4 personas que viven juntas. Somos 2 parejas, una pareja gay y una pareja lesbiana que decidieron compartir un proyecto de vida, con lo cual han hecho una familia. En un principio el proyecto era 2 madres lesbianas que deciden tener su nené. No encontraba donante, no encontraba asistencia porque evidentemente no la hay, no existe, es nulo. Porque si no eres mujer heterosexual no tienes derecho a acudir a las clínicas de reproducción asistida.
Ya agotamos todas las vías legales, vamos a hacerlo en la casa.
Y encontré el donante. Él accedió porque él tenía el mismo problema que yo, pero los hombres están peor, más marginados.
Yo siento mucho orgullo de ser padre. No necesariamente tengo que ser el padre biológico de una persona para sentirme padre. Alejandro, bueno, es la pareja que me acompaña.
Compartimos todas y cada una de las obligaciones, y no solo con la niña, también con Laura, porque Laura sí es de una relación anterior que Lindsay tuvo. Por tanto, si ellos 2 se integraban al proyecto familiar, y no se podía dejar exenta del mismo cariño que iba a recibir la que estaba por venir a Laura. Y eso lo hemos logrado.
Muy pocos niños en el mundo tienen el placer y el privilegio de ser tan amados por tantas personas.
Porque no solo me estás violando mi derecho como ser humano, sino que además estás violando el derecho del niño. Ahí no le puede faltar ninguno de los integrantes de la familia.
Familia sería el reconocimiento de que tanto Alejandro como yo legalmente podremos tener voz y voto sobre Ainhoa. Sería la posibilidad de que si el día de mañana yo quisiera volver a salir en estado, hacerlo legalmente y no correr el riesgo que corrimos con Oliva.
En el momento en que Ainhoa iba a nacer, una doctora dijo, hay que proteger a esta niña porque va a tener una repercusión dentro de la sociedad.
Yo creo que los derechos no se refrendan, pero bueno, ya que lo vamos a llevar a referéndum, para mí sería genial que se aprobara. Este código va a ser incluso vanguardista para Latinoamérica. Vienen recogidos todos estos derechos que se nos han negado a las mujeres y en especial a las mujeres lesbianas. El Código de la Familia en Cuba está desmontando un código anterior, rígido, homófobo. Va a cambiar la mentalidad de este país y la manera de asumir las infancias, las reproducciones, las adolescencias y las responsabilidades parentales.
Gracias a usted.
Aquello era catastrófico.
Las mata, todo destruido, casa, todo.
Porque este sí vino a arrancar todo lo que había.
Es lo que te ayuda mucho, ver la solidaridad de las personas.
Pretendemos contar lo difícil y a la vez alentador que ha sido la experiencia que hemos vivido con el paso del huracán Ian.
¿Pueden empezar?
Vamos a comenzar por esta vivienda, que son dos
La mamá y la hija con 2 niños que sufrieron una afectación de cubierta y en pleno paso del ciclón tuvieron que meterse en el closet para protegerse.
Usted, su hija y los 2 niños.
Ella, los 2 niños y yo, bien metidos, ¿no? Así, con los pies, no, sino todos metidos, sí, cerrados.
Nosotros tenemos experiencia de huracanes anteriores, pero como este no ha habido nada.
Hurricanes devastate communities across the Americas, but only Cuba must face them under a crippling U.S. embargo that prevents access to key resources and international support. Despite U.S. sanctions, Cuba's civil defense system is considered a world leader in preparing for disasters. On the community level, Cubans support each other when hurricanes come.
Siempre las personas de vivienda sólida le prestan solidaridad a los demás. En esta comunidad, que tenemos una cultura de eso, habíamos evacuado todas las personas que tenían viviendas vulnerables y que ellos después eran vulnerables, ancianos, encamados, las habíamos llevado hacia viviendas más sólidas.
Yo estoy muy orgullosa de mis vecinos, me dieron mucho apoyo. Oye, lo que te haga falta, oye, mira, trae todas las cosas para que no se te echen a perder y ven para aquí a comer. Bueno, como 5 o 6 vecinos me quisieron llevar para su casa a dormir.
Esto también forma parte de su casa.
Se puede ir uno para un centro del estado. Pero bueno, yo me fui para aquí, para casa de la vecina.
Pinar del Río bore the brunt of Hurricane Ian, but the entire country was impacted.
La situación del país ahora es tensa. El mundo completo, después de la COVID, es otro. El país está muy mal. Eso las personas lo saben. Las personas tienen fe que el gobierno va a ayudar, va a resolver el problema, porque de hecho es el gobierno el que lo tiene que resolver. Pero en lo que el gobierno llega, porque ahora todo el mundo se dio cuenta, miró a su alrededor, que somos muchos. Yo históricamente evacuaba 4 viviendas, pero bueno, este año tuve nada más a Lindsay. Y mira qué bien, qué claro, porque mira lo que pasó.
Cuando empezaron a soplar los vientos fuertes, el techo empezó a volar. Parecían hojas de papel y al entrar el aire por el techo, me llevó las ventanas del cuarto y todo, mis cosas volaron, se me mojó todo. Lo único que me dio tiempo fue sacar el refrigerador de la casa y lo guardé acá en casa de una vecina que el techo no se le voló. Fue muy triste porque cuando tú llegas a tu casa y lo pierdes todo, es muy difícil recuperarte. Gracias a Virginia y a todos los vecinos he podido irme recuperando poco a poco. De ahí coges tu fuerza y sigues para adelante.
Los cubanos somos así, lo comparten. Si aquel tiene una gallina y el otro tiene frijoles, lo traen y haces comidas colectivas. Y entonces aquel tiene un radio y el otro tiene un celular que la carga le dura más y la otra tiene una lámpara. Es bonito, es festivo, a pesar de todo. Normalmente, aquí en San Veces quien pueda no funciona. Aquí es todo lo contrario. Todo el mundo siempre está pensando en el otro. Eso no está escrito ni es algo que esté por lineamiento. Eso es algo que sale del corazón. La solidaridad es el rasgo distintivo.
Gracias a usted. Sino para América Latina completa y por todas las mujeres negras. Estamos muy dignas, de verdad. Y eso pasa por la lectura, pasa por qué textos son los que leemos.
Yo quisiera que me comentara un poquito, vicepresidenta, cómo es ser una mujer afrocolombiana y crecer en el Cauca.
Bueno, yo creo que cómo ser una mujer afro en Cauca es igual que ser una mujer afro tal vez aquí o en cualquier otro lugar del mundo. Siempre estamos expuestas a múltiples violencias en un mundo tan patriarcal, en un mundo tan agresivo. Pues ser mujer y ser mujer afrodescendiente no es tarea fácil. Yo vengo de un pueblo que ha vivido historias largas de exclusión, de marginalidad, de violencia, porque mis abuelas les tocó vivir violencia con la esclavitud. Luego mi mamá le ha tocado vivir violencias también. Así que es una cadena larga, sí, de violencias que es necesario cortar. Pero bueno, aquí estamos también con unas mujeres berracas, como decimos en Colombia, luchadoras que no se vencen y que han sido para mí un ejemplo de superación, un ejemplo de esfuerzo, un ejemplo de amor también, de alegría para sobreponernos a todas esas dificultades.
Mi abuela siempre decía, a mal tiempo, buena cara. ¿Tiene alguna memoria de algún recuerdo lindo que haya sido como mucha alegría?
Yo creo que la mayor fortaleza que tenemos es eso, es la alegría, que en medio de las dificultades, en medio de la situación difícil, la gente es capaz de sonreír, la gente es capaz de vivir con esa alegría, y eso yo creo que es lo único que no nos han podido arrancar como población afrodescendiente. Y creo que somos así en todo lado. Me imagino que aquí en Cuba es lo mismo. Sí. La gente afrodescendiente, a pesar de sus situaciones, se la vive, se la goza. Y lo mismo, busca, aquí decimos. Se la busca. Así mismo es en Colombia. A pesar de la región del Pacífico, que es la que vive, una región que ha sufrido, que ha vivido violencia estructurales, la gente tiene la capacidad de sonreír. La gente ha usado su música, el arte, la cultura y lo que somos, nuestra identidad, para sobreponernos. Eso es algo que uno lleva en su ser. Eso a veces no tiene explicación, solo se vive y ya.
¿Y cómo se trasladan todas esas experiencias y sobre todo usted como mujer negra, lo que representa, sobre todo el estilo que mantiene apegada a las raíces africanas, a nuestras raíces africanas, en la vicepresidencia de Colombia?
Bueno, yo me descubrí negra como a los 13 o 14 años. Tuve la fortuna de conocer al Proceso de Comunidades Negras, una organización que ha luchado por la reivindicación y el reconocimiento de la gente negra en Colombia, entre muchas otras. Esta organización precisamente ha estado muy articulada al Centro Martin Luther King de aquí de Cuba. Al principio todo lo negro era malo. Sí, sí, el cabello malo.
Pelo malo le dicen, sí, aquí, pelo malo.
Igual,
ay, ese pelo malo que tú tienes.
Igual en Colombia lo mismo, pero yo creo que ha habido un proceso fuerte de reconocimiento de identidad que a mí me sirvió mucho. También al principio no quería ser negra, quería ser mestiza, quería tener ojos azules, quería tener el cabello lacio, me echaba la alicer sin saber el daño que nos hace, porque los químicos, porque duele, porque lastima, y aguanta porque hay que ser bonita para ser más aceptada en la sociedad. Todas nosotras hemos pasado por la misma historia, pero hay momentos en donde uno dice, bueno, yo le apuesto a la libertad, y la libertad implica reconocerme en mi ser. Yo no puedo estarle diciendo a la gente que lucha por su libertad cuando mi propio cuerpo y mi propio ser todavía están encadenados. Sí, cuando mi mente sigue atada a un sistema colonial que nos impuso que lo negro es feo, que lo negro es malo y que lo bonito es lo que no se parece a nosotros. Entonces ha sido un proceso que empecé desde mis 13 años y hoy no me importa. No me importa, yo voy con mi cabello natural donde yo quiero. Me hago los peinados que quiera.
Muy bonito.
Sí.
Muy bonitos todos los estilos.
Me he visto como yo quiera, no me pongo a ver si les guste o no, si a la élite acepta o no. Por supuesto les incomoda que una mujer como yo, afrodescendiente, esté ocupando, sí, la casa vicepresidencial con mi autenticidad, con mi identidad. Eso les incomoda. Porque cuando a mayor aceptación social, la gente quiere que uno se vaya blanqueando, que uno vaya desapareciendo, hasta tal punto que la gente ya no reconoce y no sabe si uno es afrodescendiente o no, que no sabe. Y lo he visto en la televisión, que llega una mujer presentadora y lo primero que le hacen es que se alise el cabello, y después ya la maquillan con unos tonos
mucha base,
claros, que ya la gente hasta duda si es una mujer negra o no es. Entonces todas hemos pasado por esas historias que en sí son violencias, y es el racismo, ¿sí?, que se reproduce de múltiples maneras. Yo no oculto lo que soy. A veces me dicen que, ¿por qué habla con ese tono y ese acento? Pues eso soy, ¿ven? Soy una mujer de campo. Exacto. Una mujer negra que viene de un pueblo que le arrancaron su lengua originaria y que le tocó aprender el español de cualquier manera. Así que Eso ha estado en nosotros, ese es el acento que nosotros colocamos en el español, que a veces no lo pronunciamos como lo pronuncian otros, y entonces para muchos eso es malo, para nosotros eso es parte de nuestra identidad.
Pero la lengua lo hacen los hablantes. Recuerdo leer muchas cosas sobre el poco acceso a la educación que tienen las comunidades afrodescendientes y marginalizadas en Colombia. Hoy estamos aquí en la Feria del Libro de La Habana, una feria que además yo recuerdo con muchísimo cariño porque mi mamá venía todos los años a comprarme los clásicos de la literatura con muy poquito dinero, pero le alcanzaba porque los libros estaban como a precios muy económicos para que yo leyera. ¿Qué se siente estar en esta Feria del Libro hoy, que además está dedicada a Colombia como país invitado de honor, en un país como Cuba, donde el acceso y la educación ya es una conquista?
Bueno, Cuba yo creo que tiene mucho que enseñarnos a nosotros, y como usted dice, el avance en términos de acceso a la educación aquí en Cuba ha sido un avance enorme. Para nosotros estar aquí es aprender, ¿sí?, de un camino como lo hizo Cuba, como nosotros podemos seguir fortaleciendo. Creo que hemos avanzado en Colombia, no tanto como quisiéramos, todavía hay muchos desafíos en términos de educación, de garantizar el acceso, de garantizar la permanencia, pero también de una educación crítica, una educación otra, ¿sí?, que no nos borre, sino que nos ayude a seguir emancipándonos, ¿no? Y eso pasa por la lectura, pasa por qué textos son los que leemos. La historia oficial de Colombia no es una historia que se escribió con la gente negra o indígena, o se escribió con ellos pero de manera peyorativa. Siempre que se hablaba del afrodescendiente, el negro, el indígena, fueron esclavos.
No esclavizados.
Pero no nos dieron,
esclavos.
Fuimos esclavizados. Exacto. No nos contaron esa otra parte. Ahora ver a mujeres negras que están llegando aquí, que se están narrando a sí mismas, que no es otro hablando en nombre de ellas, sino ellas mismas, narrando sus vivencias, sus historias, su vida, hablando sobre sus entornos. Eso yo creo que es una transformación que se está dando, y Colombia lo está viviendo ahora. Sí. Ahora las mujeres negras que no le habían enseñado a leer y a escribir, pues están aprendiendo a leer y a escribir, y están aprendiendo a escribir y a narrar sus propias historias. Hoy hay muchas mujeres afrodescendientes poetas, indígenas poetas, mujeres campesinas poetas, y eso nos llena de orgullo. Ahora hay gente que me dice como, Francia, queremos escribir tu biografía. Yo no quiero que nadie escriba mi biografía, yo quiero narrarme a mí misma. Sí, yo quiero escribir sobre mí misma.
¿Cómo empezaría una biografía de Francia Márquez, escrita por Francia?
Tendría que empezar con mi historia, y no es la historia de Francia. Yo creo que tendría que empezar con la historia de mis abuelas, de lo que ellas han hecho para que yo esté aquí, del camino que ellas recorrieron aún sin saber leer y escribir para que yo hoy sea la vicepresidenta de un país.
Usted en su visita ha hablado mucho de las relaciones entre Colombia y Cuba. ¿Cómo sería ese nuevo capítulo de relaciones diplomáticas que necesitan un cambio entre Cuba y Colombia?
Creemos que esa nueva relación tiene que ser de agradecimiento, ¿no? De Colombia agradeciendo a Cuba por, en medio de la escasez, en medio del bloqueo, Cuba ha abierto las puertas a cientos de jóvenes que han venido a estudiar medicina aquí. Y ese es el regalo de Cuba, no solo a Colombia, sino al mundo, ¿sí? Y es increíble de cómo un país, una nación bloqueada económicamente, está exportando al mundo entero ciencia en la medicina. Segundo, Cuba ha jugado un papel trascendental en el camino de la paz que hemos iniciado en nuestro país. Ha estado ahí. Eso le ha costado, por supuesto, que ahora lo coloquen en la lista como de los países que favorecen el terrorismo. Yo creo que eso No es posible llamar a un pueblo que le apuesta a la paz terrorista. Sin dudas, el esfuerzo de Cuba para ayudarnos en Colombia a hacer la paz es algo de lo que los colombianos siempre tendremos que estar agradecidos. Cuando hablo de fortalecer las relaciones implica el reconocimiento, pero por otro lado implica abrir posibilidades. Ojalá lleguemos a que hay relaciones comerciales entre Cuba y Colombia, en que hay intercambio de ciencia, de tecnología, pero sobre todo en que Cuba sirve de puente para conectar el Caribe, para conectar con África.
¿Qué rol juega Estados Unidos en todo esto?
Pues no sé qué rol quiera jugar, ¿no? Creo que ha jugado un rol de imposición para la región. Ahora podría jugar un rol de facilitador, si así lo quisiera, para avanzar en una apuesta, por ejemplo, de asumir los desafíos de la paz. No son nuestro enemigo, pero creo que se puede cambiar la política en favor de y el bienestar de muchos pueblos.
Si le pudiera dar un mensaje a nuestra audiencia en Estados Unidos, negra, latina, ¿qué les dijera?
Bueno, que vamos de la resistencia al poder hasta lograr que la dignidad se haga costumbre y que vamos a luchar juntos en contra del racismo estructural, en contra de las formas de opresión que no nos han permitido ponernos de pie y caminar con nuestros propios pies.
Thank you very much for being here today. And thank you very much also for all your solidarity with Cuba, with the Cuban people. Thank you. We feel very honored to be here today. We are open to all kind of questions that you have about the Cuban situation, the sanctions, about whatever you want to ask today. That's your opportunity, take it.
My name is Lindsay, and
I'm so sorry.
you know
My
who
name
she
is
is.
Lisa.
No, not necessary. But no, they know you. You're famous. Thanks so much, People's Forum, for having us here. It's really special. I am with Belly the Beast and since the beginning, and in Cuba, and had been working with Liz for a few years now. And you know, Liz won an award for the first season of the war in Cuba. She won a Gracie Award, which is a very sort of prestigious award for women in film and media and television. And she was invited to Beverly Hills to receive the award and walk the red carpet. But it was the middle of COVID, and it was pretty much impossible to get a visa for her at that time. So we tried as hard as we could to try to make it happen, but that was more than 2 years ago. So we've been sort of working to figure out how to get her to the U.S. and to get to present this work, and so that. But it's not been easy. It's not easy. A lot of hurdles to come here. In part, at first it was COVID, but also because of the U.S. embassy being closed, because of this so-called Havana syndrome, which we did not show that episode, but we did an investigative episode about that. It's episode 4 of The War in Cuba, which you haven't seen it. I encourage you to watch that. And a lot of the investigative work we did there, sort of showing the uncovering what was really behind that, ended up that all of the major intelligence agencies confirmed that in recent months, a lot of the things that we were reporting on some time ago. But in any case, it took a long time to get her here, so we're very happy to be here. It's a real pleasure, and thank you. It's incredible. It's an honor to have such a packed house and an audience here to watch our work. Thank you so much.
Do you have questions about Cuba? Someone?
I think before we get into audience Q&A, I think we want to start by a few introductory questions of just sort of your reflections on the process of making both seasons of War in Cuba, why you have chosen to produce some of these episodes with a mind towards the U.S. audience. And yeah, I think you want to both start by talking about those two things.
Okay, read.
Well, when we started the war in Cuba, Cuba was in Trump was president, and there was this drastic change. Actually, it was really, I hadn't seen the first episode in so long, so it was nice to see it, to sort of, because you sort of need to be reminded. Imagine such drastic changes in one country in such a short period of time. Under Obama, with people, as that businesswoman said, that she had hope for the first time. Young people felt, hey, not for the first time, but people felt, hey, I can stay here. I don't have to migrate. The economic situation is bad, but things are getting better, and it looked like the embargo could end, and restrictions were being loosened and so on. And to see that change so drastically, if Obama took a step forward, Trump took 2 steps back, and things got really, really bad. And there was just no reporting on it. They were reporting on this distinct measures, as mainstream media often does. This Trump passed this measure today, but nothing sustained, nothing in depth, nothing that showed how people were, how it was affecting people on the ground. And so that was our mission with the war in Cuba, was to try to show from the perspective of Cuban people what are, how are these measures and these sanctions that have been around for 60 years but started to get much worse under Trump and intensified under Trump, how were they affecting people in Cuba, and dig in a little into why they were there in the first place.
All right, so we'll take question. Oh wait, Liz, did you want to say anything about the question?
No, well, the process for me was different because I started recording the war in Cuba once that Reed have this idea of how to show the impact. They have at the beginning a different idea with another Cuban American presenter, but that didn't happen because of COVID and because of the pandemic. So I start with Belly of the Beast on the war in Cuba once that they have like a crew already created. So for me it was a challenge because I was the new one that was coming on to Belly of the Beast and trying to do this series for talking about the blockade. I used to work for Cuban television, so I used to work talking with the Cuban people about this, how the wars works. So for me, it was challenging to trying to do the opposite things. I'm going to explain the word how Cuba works and how the sanctions have an impact in Cuba. And I say the sanctions and the blockade for us, but as a journalist, I didn't know so much about the blockade. The blockade is and the blockade is because the blockade, young people in Cuba are so tired to hear about the blockade. That's why, es porque lo queman mucho. Because I think that Cuban government has failed in the way that he explained the blockade to us. That's why people in Cuba don't understand how the blockade on the sanctions really works, because nobody explained to us. Also because the blockade, the sanctions is so, it's so big. It's something that it's something that you can't touch. It's something that you can point with your finger. It's something that is there. But it's not, this sanction, the last sanctions is affecting at least Oliva Fernández and her family. No, it's affecting a country, a government supposedly. But you have an idea of that if you realize that the 80% of the Cuban people works for the government. And the most of them are Black. Because we have new entrepreneurs now. We have like private sector now booming since Obama era. But that kind of sector, that kind of enterprise, barely hire Black and all women because they only want young women, beauty women, like the kind of women that fix and the standard of beauty that they have. And also the stereotype of beauty that they have. So women working in a bar, like without children, because who knows, if you have a children, maybe you don't come to work tomorrow because your children is sick. I don't want that for my business. It's bad for the business. It's bad money. I'm wasting money with you. So I'm going to pick one, some like skinny, white. If you're Black, maybe you have a work in the kitchen, or you have a work, I don't know, or you don't have a work at all, because tourists like mixed women instead of Black women. So it's more complex that the things that you can see. It's easier for young people point with the finger to the government. It's blame to the government because you are my government, you are my president, so you need to answer with me, to answer to me. So if I don't have food, if I don't have medicine, you have to find a solution. In Cuba, we say we need a plan B, but with the sanctions, we need a whole alphabet. It's a C, B, D, because the sanction is not the same the entire time. It's changing with the time. It's harder with the time. So I figure out, I don't know, I don't be jealous about the Cuban government because it's not easy work, because they need to all the time trying to find ways to get away with the sanctions, because it's difficult, because it's not just against Cuba and U.S. as we explained in the words. Cuba is about Cuba and the world, the isolation. The goal is that the people in Cuba are angry, get angry, and trying to overcome the government. The real thing is the people in Cuba are really angry, because 60 years is too many years. We are tired to wait for a better future. We want a better future now. You know how the young people work. We want it, and we want it now, no tomorrow. So we get tired. And right now the situation is really bad. And young people don't see that possibility that Reed said. We don't know if it's possible to have a better future in Cuba. That's why he goes to United States or whatever. It's no, I don't know if some of you maybe come from a family that migrates some point of the view. The most of the people don't migrate for political situation. That's a lie that United States create for Cuban people. That's a lie that they use to have this privileged situation for Cubans is not the same situation for people from Honduras or El Salvador or Colombia or Venezuela or República Dominicana or Haiti. That's really sad. Because people in Cuba are living because the economic situation, because it's tough living in Cuba. Imagine if you born, raised, and you have your entire adult life in a country that is in crisis all the time. It's difficult. So it's difficult, like leave the country, say goodbye, because you're saying goodbye also to your friends, to your family, to your mom. I have a lot of moms without daughters in my country because my friends have chosen to go to other countries, and that's okay. I'm fine with that because I know that they are doing that because they are trying to chase in better life. But it's really sad for her mother staying in Cuba waiting for her. I don't talk about like hundreds of mothers doing that in this moment, and it's hard for them because they have to say goodbye to her family, to her friends, and also say goodbye to her country, and also to say goodbye to their traditions, their culture, and also scratch from the zero in countries like this one. That I just see a little bit because I spent like a little time here in the United States until now so far, but it's a difficult country to have life, to try to build a better future. That's the American dream. It's a lie. I know that it's a lie, but it's still that a lot of people continue to go into this country because they say, okay, this is the best country that maybe I can build that. And it's tough, but that's the media sell us. That's the media sell us. If it is difficult, imagine in Cuba, like people said. And I don't know how to say. I'd rather to say it in Cuba even when the situation is bad. But that's not the option. That's not that everybody's choosing right now, because the reality is really more harder that we can show in this screen today. Okay, I'm open to questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz and Reed. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and then we'll pass it to you.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you for being here today. Thank you. I want to know if the fact that China is becoming such a world force, how does that affect Cuba, or does it?
We'll take one more question.
China do like the Chinese do their own business. They are not trying to build a better future in Cuba. Of course, they help Cuba because they are allies in so many aspects, but we don't see the impact of this, work, because China is a capitalist country, even when they have like a socialist government and the socialist party. So they are trying to earn money and doing business. They have like they have been doing a really big work, trying to get money from Africa and another part of the world, but they are not have like a so big presence in Cuba. So it's not like Cuban young people are learning Mandarin to try to move to China to do nothing. So I don't know.
Yeah, and Cuba's very far from China. Yeah. So that's actually one argument you hear a lot about the embargo. Oh well, Cuba can just you see China. What are the names of the buses? You don't call them a bus.
Yutong. Yutong.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that are there are commercial relations between China and Cuba. And obviously, that is helpful to Cuba, but it doesn't mean that the embargo or the blockade doesn't make an impact. It makes a tremendous impact because China being so far away to trade is more costly, And in addition, even trade in China can be complicated by the blockade because it is not just between the United States and Cuba directly. The blockade affects international financial institutions all over the world. And I've even heard of cases of Chinese banks that won't do business with Cuba because of the blockade. You know, interesting, we were just talking yesterday about how TikTok is not accessible in Cuba. Nobody uses TikTok. People know about it and they get it on WhatsApp because it's
Linky.
Yeah.
Linky.
But maybe, yeah. Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
We'll take the next question.
Hi, I just want to thank you, Liz, immensely for all of your work. And with the spirit of Gloria Rolando, I want to recognize the legacy of truth tellers you're a part of. So thank you. I was just curious if you had any thoughts on the Cuban experience in relation to the greater African and indigenous diaspora.
I love Gloria Rolando. We spent time with her in the Santiago Álvarez Memorial Festival. She's great. Well, as an activist, I really love have a bigger focus in my work about Black people in Cuba. Also, as an activist, I really want to focus as a journalist, the problems that we have inside of Cuba that I need answer to our government. But the sanctions are so big, are so everywhere, that I feel the necessity to focus my work in sanctions and the U.S. policy, how it affects us. When we, in some moment, that the sanctions gone, I may be going to really happily I'm going to focus in other things. That's the problems that we have inside of Cuba, trying to focus in the Black communities because we don't have indigenous community in Cuba. The Spaniards kill everyone. There's nothing left after that. But also there is an interesting point that because the sanctions affect all of us, but the more vulnerable you are, the more affected with the sanctions. For example, if you have family in the U.S. living in Miami, la vida loca, el sueño americano, maybe it's easier for you overthrow to the blockade, to the sanctions, because they're sending money that is really quite expensive for them. It's more expensive sending money to Cuba to sending money to other countries in the world, because right now they come back again with the Western Union remittances, but when Trump took off the remittances, the money have to be 40% of the interest to private companies, where in Miami, that owner was Cuban Americans. So also, if you have see a lot of Cuban Americans talking in TV, the most of them are white. So the white families get the money, not the Black ones. So you can imagine where is the situation is going.
Liz, thank you for being here. Just to piggyback off this question, I love how you intertwine freedom of Blackness and, the way you mention colorism in this documentary. It makes me curious to know what was your journey coming up as a journalist, as a Black woman who is an activist, who is amplifying being Black in Cuba. So I would love to know that, please. And thank you.
I love to share. Well, for me I think that it's the same with all of us, Black women around the world. When I was a child, I didn't want to be a Black. My grandma is white, so and my mom is mixed. So I was the Black, the person with more Blackness in my skin. And I don't want that. I don't want that because recognize myself as a Black woman, as a Black child, is too many violence with them. With the Cuban government and the revolution, we have a lot of social justice on Cuba, but the racism is something that is bigger. That there are a couple of problems about social justice because it's here. So, for example, my grandpa was a mulatto, and my grandma is a granddaughter of Spaniards. My mom was the first of her family to go to the university and to get a degree. My mom is a doctor. My grandpa fought with the Ejército Libertador, the Cuban Revolution, because he wanted a better future for her daughter. But a future that Black girls or mixed girls can become a doctor in some point. So I was the second one generation in my family to go to university. But even when I have the opportunity to go to university, my mom always used to say to me, like, you need to work hard. You need to try to behave yourself. You need to speak like in a quiet voice. You're trying to need to speak well. You need to be. You have to be coherent. Is the word coherent? Yeah, I'm so sorry for my English. You need to be coherent. You need to be your behavior have to be excellent because you are Black. It's because you are a woman. So 3 generations after, people in Cuba have to worry about the color of their skin because the things for us are difficult. Because the slavery was yesterday for us. And those are the things that keep in the people in their minds, it's difficult to overcome them, even when they have social justice and other problems and trying to speak us as a Cuban and not as an Afro-Cuban of Cubans that come from a different social orient. But it's difficult because when your grandfather was a doctor and you become a doctor or a poet, you have the freedom to speak whatever you want. It's easier for you to throw into your life. But when your grandfather was slavery or was something that barely can reach a degree, a high school, that's tough for you because maybe, I don't know how to explain that. Maybe I'm explaining wrong. I don't know. I'm explaining right? Because it's difficult because you have an heritage that you need to overcome. And this is not something that you do in a couple of years. The revolution is really young. And also, I always say the revolution has to be anti-racist and feminist because is that the way? I don't want it. I need a revolution inside the revolution. And also, my path as a journalist was funny because, of course, in some point of my life, I realized that, well, I'm Black. I need to be aware of that. But I wasn't proud of that. So I know that I'm Black, but I'm not proud of being Black. When I was in the university and I started to notice and to try be in touch with Black women, I started to be proud of my Blackness and my heritage and my Black people. I'm from Africa. And in that point, I started to shame myself. I cut my hair myself, and I started my hair growing in a natural way. I work for Cuban television. I used to be a presenter. I used to straighten my hair really long, really Black. And when I appear in a new room with my new look, everybody was looking at me like, what's happened with you? Where is the tornado in Managua? Because your hair looks messy. And it was so quite so shame because I wasn't proud. See, my attitude at the beginning was so defensive, like yelling to the other people, and that way they say that Black people are trying to be violent. In some points, I don't care the opinions of the other people, because you don't see a lot of Black women presenting on Cuban television. You don't see less women presenting on Cuban television with natural hair. That's less common. But for me, the point of that, say, I'm doing right, was I have a message on Messenger, I think so, that a group of women that was trying to do initiative for Black people called Lo Llevamos Rizo, like I'm wearing curly or afro. And they say, thank you. Thank you for wearing your hair natural. Thank you for presenting news on TV in that way, because this helped us to visualize that be Black and be for Black children, that is okay to be Black, and it's beautiful to be Black, and it's beautiful our hair. So thank you for that. And that for me was everything, was a turning point.
Buenas noches y thank you, Liz. Yo soy de la otra ala del pájaro de Puerto Rico. Te felicito. Es un orgullo estar aquí contigo.
Gracias a ti.
The question that I have is, it dealt a little bit in one of your segments, which when you were talking about during the Obama years, how the embargo was somewhat, lightened, or tú sabes, dejaron más cosas pasar. And there were fashion shows and movies being filmed there, the Rolling Stones and all this other stuff is happening. In Puerto Rico, we're losing people because we have unfettered and violent capitalism going on in Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico is also the oldest colony in the world and continues to be ravaged by everything that capitalism represents around the world. So my question to you is, do you think if Cuba were to not have the embargo tomorrow, what does that mean for the revolution? Would the ideals of the revolution be preserved? Or would you have to constantly have to also fight back against those forces from Miami and elsewhere and Wall Street that would already want to have a Walmart right smack in the middle of Havana and would want to have chain stores all over Havana and would propel all the kinds of violent ideals that capitalism represents?
Well, a Cuba without blockade, I don't know, because I was born on the blockade. So imagine a country like without that. For me, it's difficult. I hope that we get a better country that we already have. I really hope that these things that happen now, because we need to open to other funds of getting money, because we are really in a crisis, don't get the country. Because this is something that we need to learn how to control. Because it's okay that private enterprise are doing, people doing their things, but it's also a threat for the things that we already built. So we need to learn how to do that. And also for me, it's going to be difficult to learn how to walk like straight, because the blockade is also trying to look for desperation solutions for everything. So if you have to, the time for thinking quiet, what is the wise solution for our problems? I don't know. But I really hope that we have a better country. Cuban Americans, Dios mío. Keep them in Miami, please. I hope so.
All right, we only have time for one more question, so I'm gonna get this.
Buenas noches, qué bueno que puedes estar aquí con nosotras hoy. I have a question. I really enjoyed the film about the family law, and I wanted to know what happened with it. And well, I had a second question, but it just also wanted to know how, if people watch the war on Cuba in Cuba, and what has been the general reaction. And felicidades a ustedes dos. And hi, Reed. I used to work with Reed like 10 years ago. What's up?
thanks for that question. Well, the family code was approved. Yeah. Cheers for that. So it's already working. People are already getting used to family code. I think this is something, when I talk about the Cuba that I hope to build in the future, is that kind of Cuba. The Cuba that everybody has rights. And the government think about everybody, because the family code is not so only about same-sex marriage. It's not only about the rights that all people have. It's the right that children have. That I don't know any regulation similar around the world. I don't know if you know someone that regulate rights for everybody, that really cares about all people. Nobody cares about people around the world. It's like a trash. If you have a good retail plan, you're good. If not, I don't know, maybe your son or your daughter is going to get worry about you, but the rest of the world don't care. We have really a bigger population of older people in Cuba. For that reason, for us, it's important to regulate rights for them, because they are still alive. They have rights to be taken care of and taken care of right. So no, it's not something that, okay, I'm going to take care of my mom, of my aunt, of my uncle, whatever. It's going to take care of them well. Like clean food, medicines, everything that they need, and they do affected. They also need affected, and that's all the things regulated by law in Cuba, because that's the kind of life that they deserve. But that's the kind of life that decide to stay in Cuba and to bet for the Cuban Revolution and a better country in that. So they deserve a better future. That's one the kind of things that family code also does for us. About, what's the second question about? So sorry.
Do people watch?
Well, it's in English. So, but instead of people reacting really well to the
people watch it. We know, because I've been in places with Liz, and people come up to her and say, you're the one in the... It actually, the first season aired on Cuban television and on a program that's very watched on Cuban television called Mesa Redonda, all 3 episodes of the first season. So, yeah, we did a Spanish language version for it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. People like it, the war in Cuba. Because even when they are not agree, they just say, you were too soft with the Cuban government. They deserve like him. And I say, because I'm not talking about the Cuban government, I'm talking about U.S. government. But it's okay. You can do it once, a war in Cuba, about the Cuban government, but this is not sense that they call the war in Cuba. So you need to change the name of that. But they like it, because for the first time, there is someone who explains them how the sanctions work, how the sanctions affect us, because it's a domino effect. It's not something that is going straight to you. So I think the reaction of people was good. Mia?
Well, thank you so much, everybody. Can we get another round of applause? I think that will conclude the program for tonight. Thank you so much, Liz, for being here. You can watch the rest of the War on Cuba series and more of Belly the Beast videos on YouTube and all social media. They're on there. They've produced great videos. And thank you so much for coming out to the People's Forum. If you're interested in learning more about Cuba, don't know much about it, there we have a number of books at 1804 Books at the front. And thank you. Everyone have a good night.
Lo disfruté muchísimo. I really enjoyed being here today. So thank you for all the questions.